The Galactic Exploration Team's ship pierced through the thick, crimson clouds of Volaris, the heat so intense that the hull's cooling systems struggled to keep up. Inside the cockpit, Commander Zartol, an imposing figure with a deep cerulean complexion and iridescent eyes, sneered at the human among his team. To him, Lieutenant Dolores Griffin was a frail, naive addition to an otherwise elite group. She sat quietly, her hands gripping the armrests as the vessel jolted from the turbulence of the planet's volatile atmosphere. "This is no place for a human," Zartol growled, his voice low and condescending. "Earthlings barely survive their own mild climates. What makes you think you'll endure Volaris?" Dolores turned her head, her green eyes meeting his unflinching gaze. "I volunteered for this mission because I'm capable, Commander," she replied evenly, though her voice carried an undertone of defiance. The ship landed with a shuddering thud on an outcrop of cooled volcanic rock. Outside, rivers of molten lava glowed ominously, and geysers of superheated steam erupted sporadically into the hazy sky. The air shimmered with heat, and even inside the ship, the oppressive temperature was palpable. As the team prepared to disembark, Zartol's second-in-command, a wiry alien named Zell-Ra, handed out heat-resistant suits. "These will protect you," Zell-Ra explained, glancing at Dolores with skepticism, "though for how long remains uncertain in your case." Dolores accepted the suit without comment, suppressing the irritation bubbling under her calm exterior. She knew she had to prove herself not just to Zartol but to the entire team. Her assignment to this mission had been met with widespread doubt, her human physiology seen as a liability rather than an asset. The team stepped out onto the surface of Volaris, their boots crunching against brittle obsidian like rock. The heat hit like a physical force, even through the suit's protective layers. Dolores adjusted her visor, which displayed real-time temperature readings. The numbers were staggering, far beyond what any environment on Earth could produce naturally. She took a steadying breath, focusing on the task ahead. "Keep up, Lieutenant," Zartol barked as he led the group toward the crystalline caverns marked on their map. His gait was confident, almost arrogant, as though he were daring the planet to challenge his superior alien biology. Dolores followed, her eyes scanning the terrain. Lava rivers snaked through the rocky expanse, and the ground was riddled with cracks that occasionally hissed with escaping steam. It was a treacherous landscape, one that required constant vigilance. Despite the suffocating heat, she remained alert, her mind cataloging potential hazards and escape routes. As they marched, Zartol's disdain for Dolores became more apparent. He issued orders to the team, but his comments toward her were laced with derision. "Careful, human," he said mockingly when she paused to examine a fissure. "You might trip and fall into a lava flow. I doubt your fragile frame could handle that." Dolores bit back a retort, knowing that any show of frustration would only fuel his prejudice. Instead, she focused on the mission, determined to let her actions speak louder than words. An hour into their trek, the team encountered their first major obstacle, a wide chasm, its depths glowing with molten lava. The heat radiating from it was so intense that the air itself seemed to ripple. Zartol stopped at the edge, his expression one of irritation rather than concern. "This wasn't on the map," he muttered, consulting his holo display. "The cartographers failed to account for recent tectonic activity." Dolores stepped closer, peering into the chasm. It was too wide to jump, and the unstable rock formations on either side made detouring risky. She looked up at Zartol, who was already muttering about the incompetence of human cartographers. "We could try to find a narrower section to cross," Dolores suggested, keeping her tone neutral. Zartol shot her a withering look. "Do you think we have time to wander aimlessly across this waste land, Lieutenant? The longer we delay, the more unstable this planet becomes." Dolores clenched her jaw but didn't respond. Instead, she began examining the terrain around the chasm, searching for a solution. Her eyes fell on a series of rock formations that jutted out over the lava, their surfaces blackened but solid-looking. A plan began to form in her mind. "I think I can scout a path across," she said, turning back to the team. Zell-Ra's brow ridge arched skeptically. "And how do you propose to do that, human? Fly?" Dolores ignored the comment, pointing to the rock formations. "If I can reach those outcroppings, I might be able to find a stable route." Zartol laughed, the sound sharp and grating. "You? A fragile earthling. If anyone crosses first, it will be me. Volaris's eyes narrowed. With all due respect, Commander, your suit might not hold up if those rocks are as hot as they look. Let me try. If it's too dangerous, we'll find another way. For a moment, Exartol seemed ready to dismiss her outright, but something in her tone gave him pause. He gestured dismissively. Fine, but if you fall, don't expect us to retrieve your remains. Dolores ignored the jab, focusing on the task ahead. She approached the edge of the chasm, the heat searing even through her suit. Carefully, she tested the first rock with her boot. It held firm. Step by step, she began to navigate the precarious outcroppings, her movements deliberate and precise. Behind her, the team watched in tense silence. Even Zartol, for all his bluster, seemed unwilling to look away. As Dolores reached the midway point, a gust of superheated air surged up from the chasm, causing her to falter. She steadied herself, her heart pounding, and continued forward. When she finally reached the other side, she turned to face the team, her chest heaving with exertion. The rocks are stable enough, she called out. You can cross if you're careful. Zartol's expression was unreadable as he led the team across, following Dolores's path. When he reached her, he paused, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. Not bad for a human, he said gruffly before moving past her. Dolores allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The oppressive heat of Volaris weighed heavily on the team as they continued their trek. The rocky terrain seemed to stretch endlessly, with jagged peaks of blackened stone framing their path. The shimmering rivers of molten lava provided a stark, glowing contrast to the otherwise dark and barren landscape. Despite the successful crossing of the chasm, tensions within the group remained palpable. Commander Zartol walked at the head of the formation, his strides purposeful and unyielding, though his occasional glances toward Dolores betrayed a lingering curiosity. Lieutenant Dolores Griffin maintained her place near the middle of the group, her every step a careful calculation. She felt the heat more acutely than her alien companions, even through the heat-resistant suit, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she focused on the mission ahead, scanning the landscape for potential threats and paths that might lead them closer to their objective. Her mind replayed the events of the chasm crossing, the memory of Exartol's grudging acknowledgement fueling her determination. Lieutenant, came the voice of Zelra, the wiry alien second in command, from behind her. Your little stunt back there doesn't mean you've proven anything. This environment will break you eventually. Dolores turned her head slightly but kept her pace steady. The environment hasn't broken me yet, she replied, her tone calm but firm. Zelra snorted, a sharp, clicking sound that echoed faintly in the thin, hot air. We'll see. Ahead, Zartol raised his hand, signaling the group to halt. Dolores followed his gaze and saw what had caught his attention, a massive, jagged fissure running perpendicular to their path. Steam and sulfurous gas hissed from its depths, creating a shimmering haze that distorted the air above it. Zartol consulted the holographic map projected from his wrist device, frowning as he cross-referenced the readings with the terrain before him. This fissure wasn't here in the last survey, Zartol muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. The tectonic activity on this planet is more volatile than anticipated. Dolores stepped closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. Do we have a way around it? She asked, her voice steady. Zartol glanced at her, his expression unreadable. The map suggests a possible detour to the north, but it will add hours to our journey. Time we can't afford to waste. Zelra chimed in, his tone laced with disdain, and attempting to cross it would be suicide. Dolores studied the fissure, her mind racing. The gap was too wide to leap, and the unstable edges made even approaching it risky. Yet something about the steam vents caught her attention. They weren't constant, their hissing bursts followed a discernible rhythm, like a pulse. Her eyes narrowed as she counted the intervals between eruptions, mentally mapping the pattern. I think there's a way across, Dolores said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Exartol turned to her, his expression a mix of skepticism and annoyance. And what brilliant human solution do you propose this time, Lieutenant? Dolores stepped closer to the fissure, pointing toward a series of protruding rocks that jutted out like stepping stones. The steam vents follow a pattern. If we time our movements carefully, we can use those rocks to cross without being scalded. Zelra barked a laugh. You're insane. One misstep, and you'll be cooked alive. Xiartol crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on Dolores. It's a gamble. One that could cost us precious time and lives. Dolores met his gaze, her green eyes unwavering. It's a calculated risk, Commander. And it's faster than the detour. For a long moment, the Xiartol said nothing. The only sounds were the hissing of steam and the distant rumble of molten lava flows. Finally he nodded, though his expression remained stern. Very well, he said. But you'll go first, Lieutenant. If you're so confident in your calculations, prove it. Dolores nodded, accepting the challenge without hesitation. She stepped forward, her heart pounding as she approached the edge of the fissure. The heat from the steam vents was intense, even through her suit, and the sulfurous stench burned her nostrils. She focused on the rhythm of the eruptions, timing her movements with precision. Her first step onto the protruding rock was tentative, testing its stability. It held firm. She waited for the next burst of steam to subside before moving to the next rock, her movements deliberate and controlled. Behind her, the team watched in tense silence, their skepticism palpable. As Dolores reached the halfway point, a particularly violent burst of steam erupted near her, sending a wave of scalding heat her way. She instinctively ducked, her suit's protective layers absorbing the brunt of the heat, but leaving her shaken. She took a steadying breath, her resolve unbroken, and continued forward. When she finally reached the other side, she turned to face the team, her chest heaving with exertion. The path is clear, she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just follow the timing of the vents. Xiartol was the first to follow, his movements confident but cautious. He reached the other side without incident, though his expression remained stoic. One by one, the rest of the team crossed, each step a test of nerve and precision. Zell-Ra was the last to make it across, his earlier bravado replaced with a grudging respect. When the team regrouped, Xiartol turned to Dolores, his gaze piercing. You were right, he admitted reluctantly. Your calculations were sound. Dolores allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. Thank you, Commander. Xiartol's expression hardened once more. Don't let it go to your head, Lieutenant. We still have a long way to go. As the team pressed on, Dolores felt a flicker of satisfaction. She had proven herself once again, not just to Xiartol but to the entire team. Yet she knew the true test was still ahead. Volaris was an unforgiving planet, and the dangers they faced were far from over. The group moved in tense silence as they continued their journey deeper into the treacherous terrain of Volaris. The oppressive heat, though slightly tempered by their suits, was unrelenting. The molten rivers grew closer together, their radiant orange glow illuminating the jagged black rocks. Dolores Griffin, still riding the adrenaline of her successful crossing of the fissure, remained alert, her sharp eyes scanning the landscape for the next inevitable challenge. Commander Xiartol led the way, his posture rigid, his pride clearly still bruised from having relied on Dolores's ingenuity. His steps were purposeful, but the occasional glance over his shoulder betrayed his lingering doubts about the human's presence. Dolores caught one such glance and met his gaze with steady resolve. He looked away quickly, his expression unreadable. The team's goal, a cavern system containing the rare crystal, was tantalizingly close. Their instruments showed its faint energy signature growing stronger, but the path ahead became increasingly perilous. The ground beneath their boots felt less stable, a subtle vibration hinting at the planet's restless tectonic activity. Steam vents hissed intermittently, and the air grew heavier with the acrid stench of sulfur. It was Zell-Ra who first broke the silence, his voice a mix of annoyance and concern. This place feels like it's ready to collapse beneath us. Are we sure the crystal is worth this? Xiartol stopped abruptly and turned to face him. The crystal is vital for stabilizing the galactic defense grid. Without it, entire systems will be vulnerable. We don't have the luxury of turning back. Zell-Ra muttered something under his breath but said no more. Dolores, however, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in the pit of her stomach. She adjusted her visor, pulling up a heat map of the area. The readings were alarming: intense thermal activity just beneath the surface, far greater than what they had encountered so far. Commander, Dolores said cautiously, stepping forward. The ground here is unstable. If we keep going at this pace, we could trigger a collapse or worse. Xiartol's eyes narrowed. Do you suggest we abandon the mission, Lieutenant? Perhaps you'd prefer we retreat to a nice, temperate planet more suited to your delicate constitution." Dolores held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "I'm saying we need to adjust our approach. Moving too quickly could put the entire team at risk." For a moment, Ixartol seemed ready to dismiss her concerns outright. But before he could respond, the ground beneath them gave a sudden, violent lurch. A deep rumble echoed through the air, and a section of the path ahead crumbled into a glowing river of lava below. "Move." Ixartol barked, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. The team scattered, scrambling to find stable footing as the ground continued to quake. Dolores instinctively grabbed a nearby rock formation, her heart racing as she steadied herself. Zelra stumbled but managed to regain his balance, shooting Dolores a look of grudging respect for her earlier warning. When the tremor finally subsided, the group regrouped on a relatively stable patch of ground. Zartol's expression was grim as he surveyed the damage. The path ahead was completely gone, replaced by a churning river of molten lava. "Suggestions, Lieutenant?" Zartol asked, his tone sharper than usual but tinged with a reluctant acknowledgement of her insight. Dolores scanned the area, her mind racing. The tremor had exposed a series of underground tunnels along the cliffside, their entrances glowing faintly from the heat within. She pointed toward them. "Those tunnels might lead us closer to the crystal," she said. "They're risky, but they're our best option now." Ixartol studied the tunnels, his jaw tightening. "And how do you propose we navigate them without melting into puddles?" Dolores hesitated for only a moment before replying. "We move in short bursts to avoid prolonged exposure. If we stay alert and stick together, we can make it through." For once, Ixartol didn't argue. He gave a curt nod and gestured for the team to follow Dolores's lead. As they entered the first tunnel, the temperature spiked immediately. The walls glowed faintly with embedded veins of magma, and the air was thick and stifling. Dolores kept her focus on the path ahead, carefully avoiding patches of rock that looked too brittle or unstable. The others followed closely, their movements cautious but coordinated. Halfway through the tunnel, a low growl echoed from the shadows. Dolores froze, her hand instinctively going to the weapon at her side. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the narrow space. "What was that?" Zelra hissed, his usually sarcastic tone replaced with genuine fear. Before anyone could answer, a massive, reptilian creature emerged from the darkness, its scales shimmering with an iridescent sheen that reflected the molten light. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its rows of jagged teeth gleamed as it snarled at the intruders. "Stand your ground," Zartol commanded, drawing his plasma blade. The creature lunged, its movements swift and predatory. Dolores reacted instinctively, rolling to the side and firing a burst from her energy rifle. The shot struck the creature's flank, causing it to roar in pain but not retreat. The team spread out, each member engaging the beast with precision and teamwork. Dolores noticed that the creature seemed drawn to movement, its focus shifting to whoever was most active. She quickly formulated a plan. "Keep it distracted," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'll aim for its weak spot." While the others continued to engage the creature, Dolores studied its movements, searching for an opening. She spotted a vulnerable patch of softer scales near its neck, partially obscured by its thick, armored hide. Taking a deep breath, she steadied her aim and fired. The shot hit its mark, and the creature let out a deafening roar before collapsing to the ground. The team stood in stunned silence for a moment, their weapons still raised. "Good shot, Lieutenant," Ixartol said grudgingly, lowering his blade. Dolores nodded, her adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Let's keep moving. That noise probably attracted more attention than we'd like." The group pressed on, the tension palpable but their resolve strengthened. As they exited the tunnel, the crystal's energy signature grew stronger, a beacon guiding them toward their goal. Despite the challenges they had faced, Dolores felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just proving herself to the team, she was proving humanity's place among the stars. As the group emerged from the oppressive heat of the tunnel, the landscape before them shifted dramatically. The jagged volcanic terrain gave way to a vast, shimmering plain of obsidian glass, its surface fractured with glowing veins of molten lava. In the distance, the entrance to the crystal cavern loomed, a dark, gaping maw in the side of a basalt cliff. The air here was marginally cooler, though the oppressive weight of Volaris still pressed down on them. Lieutenant Dolores Griffin wiped the sweat from her brow, her gloved hand coming away damp despite the suit's climate control systems. She glanced at the readings on her visor. The energy signature of the crystal was stronger than ever, spiking as they neared their destination. For the first time since they landed, hope began to outweigh the tension in her chest. "We're close," she said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Commander Zartol stood at the edge of the glassy plain, his tall frame silhouetted against the glowing horizon. He turned to face the group, his expression a mix of determination and weariness. "Close doesn't mean safe, Lieutenant. This planet has already proven it's eager to kill us." Zell-Ra let out a sharp, mirthless laugh. "And if the planet doesn't, whatever guards that crystal might." Dolores didn't respond. Her focus remained on the path ahead, the fractured glass beneath their boots reflecting the glow of the lava like a liquid fire. Each step felt precarious, the brittle surface crackling faintly under their weight. Halfway across the plain, the first tremor struck. The ground shifted beneath them, sending a spiderweb of cracks racing outward. Dolores stumbled but quickly regained her balance, her heart pounding as molten lava seeped through the fissures. "Keep moving," Zartol barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The group quickened their pace, carefully navigating the treacherous terrain. By the time they reached the cavern entrance, the tremors had subsided, leaving the plain behind them scarred and steaming. Inside the cavern, the air was dense and humid, carrying an electric charge that made the hairs on Dolores's arms stand on end. The walls glowed faintly, streaked with veins of crystalline material that pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light. The energy readings on her visor spiked dramatically as they moved deeper into the cavern, the crystal's presence unmistakable. At the heart of the cavern, the crystal awaited them. It was massive, its jagged structure rising from a pool of molten rock like a monolithic shard of frozen starlight. The air around it shimmered, distorting the light and casting fractured rainbows across the cavern walls. Dolores felt a strange pull as she approached it, a hum reverberating in her chest like the resonance of a distant bell. Zartol stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the crystal. "There it is," he said, his voice low and reverent. "The heart of Volaris." Zell-Ra's tone was less awestruck. "Now we just need to extract it without getting ourselves killed." Dolores scanned the area, her visor mapping the crystal's structure and identifying potential weak points for extraction. The process was delicate. Too much force could destabilize the entire cavern, triggering a catastrophic collapse. "We'll need to cut it free carefully," she said, gesturing to the base of the crystal. "If we use controlled energy bursts, we can separate it without compromising the surrounding rock." Zartol nodded, though his usual skepticism lingered in his eyes. "Do it." Dolores and Zell-Ra worked quickly, their tools emitting precise beams of energy that sliced through the crystalline structure with surgical precision. The hum in the air grew louder as they worked, a pulsating rhythm that seemed to sync with Dolores's heartbeat. Sweat dripped down her temple as she concentrated, every movement calculated and deliberate. Just as the final cut was made, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the cavern. Dolores's head snapped up, her heart seizing as a massive, shadowy figure emerged from the molten pool. The guardian of the crystal was unlike anything she had ever seen, a towering, serpentine creature with scales that shimmered like molten metal. Its eyes glowed with an intense, fiery light, and its maw revealed rows of jagged, obsidian teeth. The hum in the air became a deafening roar as the creature reared back, its massive body coiling around the crystal. "Defensive positions," Zartol shouted, drawing his plasma blade. The team scattered, their weapons trained on the creature as it lunged toward them. Dolores dove behind a rocky outcrop, her pulse racing as the beast's fiery breath scorched the ground where she had been standing moments before. Zell-Ra fired a burst from his energy rifle, the shot striking the creature's scaled hide but doing little more than angering it further. Dolores's mind raced as she watched the beast thrash, its movements erratic and wild. She realized that its focus wasn't on the team, it was on the crystal. "It's protecting the crystal," she shouted over the chaos. Zartol didn't respond immediately, his focus on evading the creature's attacks. Finally, he shouted back, "Then we need to separate it from its prize." Dolores's eyes darted to the crystal, now partially freed from its base. She formulated a plan in an instant. "Cover me," she yelled, breaking from her cover and sprinting toward the crystal. The creature roared, its massive head snapping toward her as she moved. Energy blasts from the team's weapons struck its side, distracting it just long enough for Dolores to reach the crystal. She activated the grav lift harness strapped to her back, securing it around the shard and engaging the lift. The crystal began to rise, its weight offset by the harness's powerful thrusters. The creature roared in fury, its movements growing more frantic as it sensed its treasure being taken. Dolores gritted her teeth, every muscle in her body straining as she guided the crystal toward the cavern entrance. "Fall back," Zartol shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony. The team retreated, their weapons firing in coordinated bursts to keep the creature at bay. Dolores led the way, the crystal hovering just above the ground as the harness's thrusters whined under the strain. As they neared the cavern's exit, the creature let out a final, deafening roar and lunged after them. Dolores turned, her heart stopping as she saw its massive jaws closing in. A brilliant flash of light erupted behind her as Zartol activated a high-yield explosive charge, the detonation striking the creature and sending it reeling back into the molten pool. The cavern shook violently, the walls beginning to crumble as the team sprinted toward the exit. They emerged into the open air just as the cavern collapsed behind them, a plume of ash and molten debris rising into the sky. Dolores collapsed to her knees, the crystal still hovering beside her, its glow undiminished. Zartol approached, his expression unreadable as he looked at her and then at the crystal. Finally, he nodded, a gesture of respect that needed no words. Dolores met his gaze, her exhaustion tempered by a deep sense of accomplishment. They had survived Volaris, and more importantly, they had succeeded. Humanity had proven its worth, not just to the team but to the galaxy. As the team prepared for their departure, Dolores allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. This was just the beginning.